Welcome to the end of 2019. A pretty horrible year for some people,
And
and
a really good year for others.
and 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 I just feel the expectations in the air for 2020. It's just big things here in Japan happening with the Olympics, but there's just an overall people excited about the possibilities of 2020.
And it has a good ring to it, 2020, of course, too.
Yep.
So
Yep.
hopefully we'll be ringing in the new year very soon.
Yeah, and this is the end of our Facebook monthlies for this year. Just squeezing one in under the wire, and it's a promise it's going to be a good one. So let's jump right into it, Phil.
Okie dokie. So today we're going to kind of do a couple of things. First of all, give you a quick monthly roundup of what's been happening in the world of ELT and via iTDi. And then we'll get into our main topic of tonight, piecing together the learner and teacher development puzzle.
I'm very excited about that part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll be talking about how we put together input, output, and also intake, uptake. What do they mean? And how they are connected in that puzzle.
Not to put any pressure on you, but this is sort of the culmination of a 10-year discussion that we've been having.
Right.
It may actually come together tonight.
Absolutely. And we'll be looking at it from the perspective of both teachers and their classes, and then also in terms of teacher development, so kind of at another level as well, and see obviously how learning takes place for us as teachers as well. Okay, so let's just have a quick look at what's been going on.
You might dim your screen just a little bit. We're getting a lot of blue glare on your glasses for some reason.
Yeah, I was trying to change the angle actually, just as you were talking. It's just when I dip there. Look,
it is. That's the dip. Okay. Okay. You take it away, Blue Eyes.
All right. Thought you had a preference for green the other day. Here we go. So just a couple of things. These are just some little quick visuals to help me remember. But the big one that we're not going to forget and has been kind of drawn a lot of attention and was a really interesting interview you did, Steve, was with Gianfranco Conti in the teacher's room the other day.
Well, I didn't have to do very much. Gian was just ready to go. I heard comments later we had to jump in and tackle him to stop at any point. And it was fascinating. I was trying to get to a few things. So yeah, I'm hoping to introduce him to people here in Japan and see if we can get him over in body to share the absolute wealth of information and perspectives that he has based on years of study and experience.
Yes, he's a fountain of knowledge and a bubbling brook all in one. So
yes.
If you want to catch the recording, you can find it on our YouTube as well as via our Facebook page.
Yep.
Okay. There's also an excellent article from him. Oops, excuse me, didn't really want to do that and get you all dizzy. There's an excellent article from him and many others shared on his website, gianfrancoconti.com. And so do check those out as well. And you'll find you can kind of get right into the meat and the details of some of the different things he's been working on and sharing and so forth. He's a real giver. So
yeah.
And we've also shared Scott Thornbury, one of his latest for Cambridge University Press, who's always on fine form. So feel free to check out that one. He's been talking about the latest method or not.
He is Mr. Methodology. He knows them and explains them better than anybody I've ever met.
Absolutely. And came across a nice video talking about autism and also got us, there's been Autism Awareness Week and month and so on. And also just as teachers, obviously being able to understand special needs from different perspectives helps us be aware of them and do something more about in our own classes as well.
Yeah.
Okay. This month, congratulations being out to Rhett and Barbie on completing the iTDi TESOL Certificate. That's 20 weeks. They've been working absolutely hard and fantastically. And they've been sharing some of their feedback as well, very generously and positively. So we've been absolutely
well beyond generous and positive. Unbelievable. We have to almost say we did not pay them to say any of this, nor even ask them. But the outpouring of emotion and thanks and appreciation of you and the course in general has really blown a bunch of us away.
Yeah, I've been really humbled, and it's totally made my year. So thank you so much for that. And we also, as always, we keep sharing resources that we think may be of use to teachers around the world, whether teaching in EFL or ESL. Lots of them come from the British Council as well as other places. So do check them out. We can't share absolutely everything, but we definitely show the pics that we find as well, and directly to resources that you can find more from. So moving on, very grateful to have worked with a number of excellent educators on our advanced skills courses, and also fantastic participants and people in teachers room on advanced skills courses and so forth. So big shout out to everyone there, and we look forward to our growing community and 2020 and what it brings. We've got 3 advanced skills courses coming out already.
Yep. And more in the works.
Yes, should be about 6 every year.
Yeah.
Okay, and Steve and I have also been sharing some videos and talking about the first lesson on the iTDi TESOL certificate course, and sharing those videos. You can get them via our YouTube channel as well if you'd like to see a little bit of what takes place inside the lessons.
Yeah. And
last but not least, Terry Harris, I came across this article, is sharing some an interesting article looking, he's in EdTech, and looking at what Cambridge University have been doing, and thinking about how we work on training and English teacher development. So there's an interesting article there, and looking at how we can make the transition to online tutoring for a lot of people who have been interested in that area as well, and what kind of support and training is involved. Funny
you should bring that one up.
Right.
So, I mean, that's literally what you and I have been talking about for 10 years and hardcore for the past number of years. And we think that we are one step closer to putting that puzzle together tonight.
Absolutely. So we're going to be moving on, and we'll unshare that one. We'll be talking about those 4 things we've been sharing, starting off with input, intake, output, and uptake.
So should I mention that's a little bit beyond what we originally thought, or do you want to start with some of the definitions first?
You can start with what you were thinking.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was 6, 7, 8 years ago when we started building the courses. They were originally called teacher development lessons, and people could come in and pick any lesson. And we had a learning cycle in mind, but it only had 3 steps to it. And it was basically, you would learn something, i.e. input on an online lesson, and then you would go back to your classroom and try it out. There was some kind of output coming from you, and try it out, and then come back to our community, reflect upon it, and kind of mark down some uptake, you know? And so it was just that simple, you know, learn it, go try something, come back and reflect on it and confirm what you thought. But what we've realized is that it's just so much deeper, so much deeper than that. And that's what we want to go into, kind of going into the weeds a little bit tonight on looking at that from different perspectives.
Right. And welcome Chiyuki, who's just joined us and is watching from Japan. Okay, so what we're going to do first of all is let's start with kind of some basic definitions so we can all get on the same page. And then we'll look at it from the teacher's perspective first, and our own classes, which is kind of more familiar and concrete for everyone. So inputs, what do we mean by input, Steve?
Well, in the classroom, input is certainly one of the 4 skills. You can say input is listening and input is reading. That's how most teachers deal with input, output,
Right.
speaking and writing. But here we're talking about the input is basically all of what you go into the classroom ready to transfer to your young scholars sitting in front of you. Everything that comes out of your mouth, all the noise in the room, the videos, the CD player, the audio, that's all potential input. Would
Right.
you agree, or have I missed anything?
Yeah. So I think the easy way of thinking it, as you said, was from the input that you provide from listening and reading for our learners in the classroom. And of course, the question, of course, is whether to what extent is noise or incomprehensible input, and to what extent is comprehensible input.
Right.
So we're very much thinking about, those key factors is what is important to consider in having quality comprehensible input, and should it only be comprehensible, or are there other important things to consider as well? So
plus, remember that they say you'll forget 70% of it within 24 hours and 90% of it within a month, according to some literature.
Right. Yeah, we have what's called the forgetting curve, and
Yes.
definitely it will escape from our short-term memory unless we do something about it, such as recycling and deliberate practice, repetition, which we can talk about as well. Hello to Rhett from Korea, Vidhi Chopra, thank you for joining us, and also Philip Pounds.
Yay. So we got this kind of big monster of input, that all the stuff that's going through the ears, if at all, of the students. And that leads us to the good news of the intake. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so in getting to intake, which is basically another way of talking about our understanding, or our learners' understanding of the
or even noticing.
Right. Then from going from input to intake, then one of the important things is noticing, noticing features of language, noticing what things people are learning. So as an example, for example, in class, when I got taught a new word when I was learning Japanese as a foreign language, then when I started walking around, suddenly I seemed to see this word appear everywhere. And I thought I'd never noticed that before or heard it before. But once I kind of been shown that word and I knew what it meant, then I would start to notice it more. So that helped.
Great example. The other big example is when you're in a relationship and your wife or partner gets pregnant, suddenly you see the world is full of pregnant women.
Right.
The other one I heard was my very first car was a Volkswagen Beetle. And when I bought that for $400 back in the 1980s, I suddenly saw them everywhere.
Right.
That's another example of intake and noticing.
Absolute classic.
Yeah.
So these 2 really important things in getting to intake is comprehensible input. And let's go a little bit back, is what makes input comprehensible? And there are a couple of different thresholds and things that people talk about. Sometimes it's to do with sentence length or grammatical knowledge and structure, that being appropriate to the learner's level, but also vocabulary, and that learners can understand, if it's comfortable, usually at 98% plus, and lower limits being 95%. As it drops below that, it becomes increasingly difficult for learners to understand. And 100% known words is fine too. Obviously, we can't, with beginners, somebody brought this up the other day, with beginners, then everything is new. So how do you deal with that? Steve, do you have a quick answer for that one?
Not a quick answer, but you just do what you need to, as far as gestures and pictures and prompts and scaffolding and
and even translation into the L1 where applicable.
If you're in a monolingual setting, everyone speaks Japanese, so that's a real easy one in my context.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
Sorry, just to tie that up, but you're very clear in terms of vocabulary, 95%, and comprehensible, that I plus 1. is Krashen's idea that I being where you're at right now, and then just a little bit beyond that, so that you are struggling to understand but still can, you know, within that area. But then there's the whole other side of whether you happen to be hungry or depressed or thinking about another deadline or your school festival the next day, or there's just so many other things that get in the way of actual intake. So it's messy.
Yeah, so sometimes we talk about affective filters and what affects our emotions as well as our physical condition, and that kind of sometimes gets in the way, as you're saying, between the input and the intake and understanding that takes place. Okay, and
output.
Sorry, there's just one other thing I wanted to say, and I just forgot it, but we'll come back to it. That's fine. So you want to move on to output and what role can output have? So beyond comprehensible input, then obviously in our classrooms, we may be getting students to have a certain degree of output in terms of speaking or writing. And how does this affect the process is the question.
Well, it's a necessary step, and we see that in Japan over the years, where there's a lack of output, where it's so input based, and therefore people can't actually use the language without having enough output practice.
Right.
The scale, the balance is completely out of whack. So it's all this input and very little output, and that's crippling in our context here in Japan. So to me, that tells us we absolutely need output opportunities in order to ever get to that final uptake stage.
Right. And this is something that, you know, I hear in a lot of EFL contexts, not only within Japan and Southeast Asia, but also in EFL Europe as well. And just, you know, people don't have the opportunity to have output out of the classroom and interaction. So we really need to provide those opportunities for EFL context, English as a foreign language, where the native language outside the class is not English.
But I can say just from 20 years experience, 10 years ago, I had 20 years experience in the high school classroom where students had English 5 times a week, and 4 out of 5 were grammar based input lessons, and 1 was an output lesson with me, with a native speaker. And that just showed right there, it was 80% input and 20% output, which is just totally out of whack.
Right. So yeah, trying to redress that balance. So for you, you know, you were talking about in a lot of classes, the need to focus on fluency to redress the balance and put that output opportunities there for your students.
So this actually, by making a commitment to output, and I did it when I first started learning about this, I actually wrote input, listening, reading, output, speaking, writing, and every part of my lesson, as we did something, I ran up and put a check mark on the board, visually trying to get myself to get to that balance. And then the students started noticing and saying, Stephen, you forgot output. And so at the end of every lesson, I did that for months until I learned what the flow was.
Right.
Or what the balance was.
Yeah, it's nice for your learners to be able to see what they're doing, right, in terms of activities and what they're gaining from it.
Yeah.
And I remember a while back, you're talking about in your fluency development, you had your students doing speaking activities and they were measuring their output and finding, you know, seeing if they could increase the amount of output that they were having in their language development, and they were writing
both speaking and writing. Literally the simplest thing is words per minute, and that's the way to mark those output measures, and they are 100% more effective than me saying you're getting better, Phil,
right?
When you can see by numbers that you're getting better on your output.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the hard things, you know, students are always asking, you know, is my speaking getting better and so on. Writing, people can see a little bit more. Speaking's always been a challenging one. Just dropping back to the chat.
Yeah. Kampan, hello from Thailand.
And hi, Amina from, I'm not quite sure where you're from, but feel free to let us know.
Unless that HI is Hawaii.
Right?
Maybe not.
And Rhett was talking also about songs. And I know Rhett's talked to us a lot about having songs both in the background as providing kind of subconscious or Suggestopedia-like input, as well as having them used in class later stage and building up familiarity with them.
And making students relax as well, you know, just taking away some of the stress.
So yeah, many good uses, and hi Kaoru as well from Japan.
Yeah. So let's do the uptake and then get into the next section on which is real fun.
Okay. Sounds good. So uptake, sometimes people describe uptake in the literature. In the research, people talk about uptake as being long-term learning or long-term memory. So earlier we talked about intake, that understanding of how much do we understand from the input, and then, you know, how much do we actually learn or keep.
Yes. For me, it's always both as a learner, I have that word, I have that phrase in my toolbox. I have it on the tip of my tongue. I'm able to use it now. Right. And as a teacher, I have it ready to, you know, use in a classroom learning situation anytime. I own it. To me, that's a big part of uptake. I own that vocabulary or that teaching idea. I've made it my own.
Right, and for me as well, I think that uptake is kind of, it comes out of learning by doing, and it comes out of kind of that reflective process and seeing what you're doing and understanding it until and also doing things repetitively to the extent that also they become part of your habit or what you do as a
language. Which I was just going to say, in our fluency book, it's that idea of automaticity.
Yes.
When things come out automatically, you know that you've learned it.
Okay. And so basically we're talking about how we've gone from input to how much we can intake, and how output and interaction affects this process, being aware of the value of comprehensible input and also of noticing language features, and also the effective filters that sometimes interfere in that interaction, and how we can eventually get to kind of, I guess it's our goal of uptake.
Well, I would say before that, just the need for the commitment to output enough output in order to be able to get to uptake.
Right.
You know, within the EFL context, there's way too much focus on input and, you know, graphically not enough focus on output. So to me, there's that make the commitment. And I've taken it to the level now that I don't care what the name of my skills course, reading, listening, speaking, writing, I don't care. I approach them all with aiming for a balance of all 4 skills. You know, if I'm doing the reading class, I will take the responsibility that maybe nobody else is doing reading. So I'm going to cover it, but I'm never going to focus only on reading. I'm going to add in listening to some of the same topics, having a chance to write about it, having a chance to speak about it or brainstorm it, because it always works much, much better when I do it that way. Right.
And actually, it just kind of reminds me of a conversation that I was having the other day with our friend Colin. He's in Japan as well. And talking about, you know, the importance of having coordination across a curriculum. So, you know, sometimes we have vertical coordination where curriculum progresses from one year to the next, especially if you're working in a school or institution. But having the coordination across the curriculum so that, yes, what you're covering in your class and what's being covered elsewhere, there's supporting overlap where needed, and also you're not leaving gaps out or having a lopsided curriculum in favor of one area or the other. So good thing to think about on that level as well.
Okay. Can we get into why we're prepping all of this input? Go back to the title of today's session.
Yes, we will. Just before then, I'd just like to give a shout out. Thank you to Arindam from India. Thank you coming in. And there's a comment from Amina. Thank you for sharing. I agree with your idea of integrated teaching.
Yeah, and they say they are from Muscat, so
all right,
not Hawaii. Thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Okay. Whenever I hear Muscat, I think of some of the best grapes.
You do.
Okay, so piecing together the professional development puzzle is the other side of it. We've been thinking about learning, but also learning for teachers. Before we go on there, I did want to say, I remembered what I was talking about earlier. One of the things about input as well that sometimes gets overlooked, and Gianfranco was talking about too, was the importance of phonotactics. And we noticed this as well in a lot of kind of EFL situations. Or
you got to explain phonotactics.
Yeah, basically where students are actually able to decode the sounds that they're hearing. And often this creates the initial barrier, even though they may be familiar with the words if they're written down, when they hear the words and they're not able to necessarily hear the different sounds and so on and distinguish words. And I remember that's pretty much my experience when I first learn a new language. It's just kind of noise, right? And then eventually you can start to figure out where one word ends and the next word begins and so on. And so really that being an important starting point in consideration if you're especially working with beginners.
Was he actually talking about teaching students like the word unbelievable and being able to hear it and know that there's 3 parts to that word? Is that how far he's taking it or what?
It was just mentioning as part of wider talk. Yeah. And Brian Betts, thank you for your comment as well. Mentioning that sometimes not enough teachers talk about how much student output can provide motivation not only for students but teachers. Right? Yes.
I think he's talking the student output, and again you have to almost fight against the system if you're in an EFL, Asia, Europe, South America. If you're in that kind of context where the curriculums are so focused on input, reading and listening, in Japan for the university entrance tests, but that there has to be teachers fighting back for enough output opportunities as well. I mean, watching Scott Thornbury talk about the PPP method last week and talking about how that 3rd P of production, and sometimes people say the 4th P of personalization, and that many teachers never get there. Right. And that was my problem for 20 years. Right. Yes. The presentation and the practice took 90% of my lesson. Right. And if I had a chance to do the same lesson 3 times, I could do it better and know that I know where to cut in order to make time. But so many lessons, if you only do them once or twice and you have different kinds of classes, you're never having enough time at the end.
Right. And so yeah, you've got often in the public sector, in the state sector or public schools where students are working towards exams that are often grammar-based exams or vocabulary-based exams, then that's kind of part of the inevitability of the system. But also even in the language school context, I was thinking back about 15, nearly 20 years ago as a teacher trainer in the language school context in Japan, then, you have a lot of teachers who come in and they initially trained perhaps in an easy methodology like PPP, practice, presentation, practice, production. And it was very common, especially for new teachers, to spend a lot of time either presenting or a lot of time practicing and giving feedback, feeling they're doing a good job as a teacher, giving correction and so on. But that practice time just becoming too long and then suddenly getting to the last 5-10 minutes saying, okay, let's do a quick role play or something. And actually that is the part that students need more of opportunity to language use.
Absolutely. I'm dying to get into this next part.
You are, and just before we get there, Chuki's got a comment on teaching English to young learners, and says it might be quite different. I think, yes, I think, you know, we've had this conversation before, you know, a lot of the stuff you do with young learners is interaction and output. Otherwise you lose them right away. So you are playing games, you are doing songs, and, you know, there's
that to me, that works in the difference between junior high school and high school for me. In junior high school, I worked up a model that was 70 or 80% input, and, you know, only 20-30% output. But then once I get into high school, I analyzed it and I was aiming for 50-50 more. 50 input, 50 output. So it's always based on those two things you and I talk about constantly, is the context you're in and the level of your students. So everything has to be put through those lenses, in order to know what's the right answer.
Right. And so somebody else the other day was asking me about, you know, what's the best thing to do in their university classes? And, you know, I can't answer that for them because they know their classes better than anybody else. But we can talk about general principles and ideas and things that you could do in classes. And it's up to them to go back and think about what parts do they want to accept, what parts do they want to reject, or what do they want to adapt into their own classrooms. Okay. So,
Chuki, here, I'm going to, Chuki, hang on here. Output starts from day one.
Yes.
Now, it depends on what you're saying output is. If output is kids repeating the vocabulary that you're doing with them, yes, that's output, but that's not exactly the output we're talking about here, is it? Or it's a part of the output we're talking about, but it's...
That's the practice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Then the uptake is once they can use the output and from their own choice, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yes, output does start from day one with young learners for sure.
Yeah, it does for everyone. If you're doing anything in the classroom that's copying out spelling is output. But again, it's that difference between controlled output and, you know, personalized output.
Right, or sometimes talked about as controlled practice versus freer practice, and where along the continuum. Nice addition. Okay, so before you do dive, waiting to get to the next part, in this, in the second half of our session tonight, we're going to move the conversation from talking about input, intake, output, and uptake in our learning context and as teachers with our students to looking at in our own professional development. And why has this been on our minds?
Absolutely. That I have just been blown away. Rhett's in the room now and has just finished up this iTDi TESOL Certificate 5-month course, right? And 20 weeks.
Yeah. So yeah, four and a bit months.
Yeah. Okay. So say 20 weeks.
That's easy.
We'll agree on 20 weeks so we don't have to calculate. And, you know, we have to say this. I've had to say it a few times to people, is that we have not paid Rhett and Barbie anything to say anything they have said publicly about the course. But we are thrilled beyond. I mean, you said a few minutes ago, it made your year.
Yeah, it really has.
Yeah, and I mean, just that really, you know, we spent 2 years building this idea, and we hoped that it would work, and we knew it could work, and we knew that we had put enough time and effort into designing it to work. We knew the materials were great, all that stuff, but we never knew that Rhett and Barbie would get so much out of it. And that's what has sent you and I back to the drawing board, trying to analyze what happened, what the hell happened in this 20-week course.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's important to learn from both our successes and challenges, failures, and so on.
Yeah.
And when we've done things right, sometimes it's easy to just have that good feeling and move on. But, you know, if we can understand why things work, then hopefully we can then do that for others as well.
Yeah, and just to say that you brought up, maybe we should invite Rhett and Barbie into the conversation tonight, and we talked about it, and we thought, well, yeah, down the road, if we're able to do that, but we wanted to kind of go back and reflect ourselves in what we tried to design, and then look at what worked, what didn't work, and kind of have put those puzzle pieces together here tonight.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go back a little bit and just starting with, we're going to look through kind of the course, and you think about your own professional and teacher development that you've taken part in, if you're watching, and also things that if you're a teacher trainer or teacher educator, then what kind of courses and teacher you run yourself, and what elements you have in common, and also what else you might feel you could be doing, or what you do differently in addition that you might also share with everybody here.
Yeah, and if you've taken a course, is this the way you got stuff out of that course? And if you're taking it now, are you getting what we're telling you was happening in our course? So let's get into it, and then people will begin to see how these ideas of input, intake, output, uptake start to, what was that word, loop around each other over and over again.
Yes, and so it's important to understand how they connect and interact and loop together. So I'm going to share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Been waiting 38 minutes for you to share this screen.
It's all coming. And Amina, thank you for sharing about your interest. We'll definitely get back to you as well, rather than multitask right now. Okay, thank you. So yeah, with the TESOL Certificate course, just some components I'm going to kind of summarize overall, but we have 45 practical interactive lessons, most of them written by Scott Thornbury and featuring videos with Scott, Adrian Doff, and a number of others in our international team of authors. Then there are, for the 20-week course, every week you have a weekly 90-minute tutorial via video conference. And
like this, right? That's exactly this, through Zoom and through,
Yes, and then in between that time of kind of the self-study online course lessons and tutorials, then there are also a couple of other tasks like working through the lessons, doing some reading tasks, and also preparing for teaching practice. And
as well as you had mentioned in the lessons themselves, there's opportunities to post to the forum, interact with people in the forum as well.
Yes, so I'm going to kind of show just a little bit of that and think about how they relate to input and how it leads to intake, where the output is, and eventually what is uptake in terms of what becomes part of us as teachers. So our online lessons, you can see examples of this we shared in actually YouTube as well for lesson 1. And teachers work through with different kind of degrees of input, reading short mini articles or working through some ideas that are presented in videos, and then thinking about how they relate to their own teaching context. Or if you haven't taught before, then you can see examples within the lessons.
So this is all input stage, right?
Yeah, this is primarily the input stage.
And within any one of these lessons, we have like 9, 10, 11, 12 activities, depending on depending on the lesson itself.
Yeah, and so most people work through them in about 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
And then, as you mentioned earlier, there are forum posts. So every lesson has a forum post, sometimes 2. And this is a good opportunity to share ideas on a particular question or topic. Usually we relate them back to your own classroom, so you can think about what you're learning and how it's implemented in yourself, or how you do it differently. Okay.
So this is some initial output.
Yeah. That's right. And then you're interacting with other people on your course or your tutor.
Yeah.
And there's reading materials. We usually select from we've aimed at getting free resources, but there's immense quality of stuff out there, whether they're written by well-known authors, Paul Nation, Scott Thornbury. Most of the big authors have their own websites and share articles freely, and also good resources, for example, British Council and so on, both at a very practical level and sometimes a slightly more research-based, but very accessible writers.
So you're still talking about input here.
Yes. So again, this is primarily input. And as you get through the course and get more confident and so on, then sometimes this leads to people summarizing what they've written, what they've read, sorry, and then discussing that in our online tutorials. So
this is Rhett now, right? And up in the top corner there.
That's right. So this was summarizing one of Scott Thornberry's articles talking about CS for conversation, and we're discussing this in our tutorial. And obviously this helps to get towards kind of our, not just our intake and our understanding, but this becomes, we think about which parts we want to incorporate into our own teaching. And
so those are kind of like the initial seeds of uptake. Because as you're kind of discussing, occasionally arguing, defending your positions, talking about your context and why this is necessary, that's all both output on your part as well as some kind of uptake happening.
Right. So this is really, you know, everybody's in it together. It's a very supportive environment. Teachers encouraging each other, sharing ideas, and you know, generally collaborating like we've always aimed to do over the decades I've known you. Okay. So there's a smiley pics, a surprise for Rhett and Barbie.
You look much younger in that. Go back to that picture just for a second. You look much younger there. You had a good haircut, I guess.
Thank you.
But again, that's the synergy happening there of people interacting, and that's where, again, the motivation, the confidence, all kinds of things are happening under the surface there, I think.
Right, actually, so let's go back 1 second as well, because earlier we mentioned, you know, between the input and the intake and everything else, we sometimes talk about our feelings and our affective filters. And obviously, when you start a new class, students are nervous. When we start a new course, we feel a bit nervous and so on. You know, a lot boils down to building that rapport with your learners and in our classes and so on, working on teamwork, etc. And it's about, and Rhett's always kind of also talked about, and Barbie, about, you know, the importance of relationships.
And I remember Rhett talking about the importance of fun, and how Rhett is really good at keeping the mood. You know, he's definitely a mood maker.
Yes. Definitely. And you can see that in his classes as well. So
that's all kinds of group dynamics there. I mean, you were lucky this was a very small group, but even when I've had groups up to, you know, 12, and many of them over a number of years, and watching those group dynamics was fascinating.
Yes, and so actually one of the things that I remember we're talking about just recently, we've done the group cohorts of 6 to 10, sorry, 4 to 10, but we've decided that we're going to reduce the maximum to 6 to maintain the quality of interaction that you can have within tutorials and the quality of kind of feedback, etc. So that would be in our 2020 changes. Okay. So then in our tutorials, we also give time for kind of peer-to-peer teaching practice. So materials that you're going to be using in your classes, but you want to be able to run them by other teachers and think about and get feedback on how they think it might work. And you can see other people's experience if they've used similar materials and so forth. And so we do that within our kind of teaching practice, peer-to-peer teaching practices each week in tutorials.
Imagine the scariness of that the first few times people had to teach each other. And it took me years, literally years, to ever stand up before the internet and talk to a group of teachers about what I did or how I did it or why I did it. And it was so funny because you get up in front of students every day and not even bat an eye. You know, but getting in front of your peers is absolutely nerve-wracking, but we're able to create a learning community which is primarily built on trust.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I had it the other way around. I would sweat buckets in my first classes before teaching students, but with teacher training, I didn't have that same degree of anxiety.
Oh, wow, you are weird. Yeah, no, I did. I still get worried if I'm not nervous on the first day every year.
Yeah,
I feel real flat if I'm not nervous. So
yeah.
I
You
still
definitely need
feel
a
nervous.
little bit of that nervous excitement.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I used to get stage fright, so
Wow, wow.
just. um, so then we have teaching, practicing tutorials, and that helps to prepare things for the teaching demonstration videos. And you know what?
Again, output here.
Yeah.
Output. Yeah.
So you got output, interaction, you're getting feedback, and we use what we call tag feedback, which
What is tag feedback? I saw that.
so we use that in forums and actually in most of our discussion just as a habit of
TAG.
yeah. So
Yeah.
T is for telling people what you really like or what is interesting or surprising about what you see or what you in your self-reflection too. A is for asking questions. So you want to know more about something you see someone else do. Or if it's your own thing you're reflecting on, you might have questions, you know, oh, I did this and this didn't go well. Can I ask you something about it? Or what do you think about this? Or should I have done X, Y, Z?
Yeah.
And then G is giving some suggestions, recommendations, and so on.
The feed forward kind of idea.
Yeah, and one of the things that I hadn't foreseen, but Barbie shared, she said she really loved the tech feedback because she was also saying it didn't force people to necessarily just be positive or be overly critical. And it reminds me too of getting excellent feedback when I was developing as a writer from Andy Barfield, and he was all about trying to move the discussion forwards, so it's less judgmental and it's more exploring and developing ideas.
Cool.
Okay. And then what we get into is we set ourselves up to do these teaching demonstration videos. And this is really a key component. And
so who is this now in this picture here we're seeing?
Okay, so Barbie, I've just borrowed a screenshot from one of her lessons. And we basically, everyone has different teaching contexts. Some people teaching one-to-one, some have small classes, some have larger classes. Some people can record just themselves teaching, some can record students with students' permission or parents' permission and so forth.
So Barbie actually recorded a lesson.
Yep, so everyone
just once.
So what happens is that in the course, people will record a minimum of 12 30-minute segments or 12 30-minute lessons. And
over the 20 weeks.
Yes.
Okay, 12 sessions I've recorded. They're all 30 minutes each.
Right.
And then I send them to you?
And then these are shared privately, either via YouTube or, for example, via Vimeo, and that we can reflect on our own teaching, see ourselves teaching.
Was that hard for Barbie and Rhett to do, or is it easy?
Initially, I think, everyone has to get used to seeing themselves on camera.
I meant the technology side of it.
On the tech side, it's got phenomenally easier over the years, just because you can record off almost any device now. And with
off your phone?
Quality, yeah. Some people record off their phone or off an iPad.
Okay.
And
then just save it, upload it to YouTube, and you have a special group that's unlisted for you guys only.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so you have a closed private community to be able to give feedback on. And, the fact that you're doing this consistently, it becomes easier, you get better at it, your students get comfortable with it, and so on.
Right.
And they're your students.
Yeah.
So when I did my CELTA, it's a really valuable part of any good teaching course is to have teaching with real students. But at the same time, with, for example, on CELTA, you're either going into someone else's class and teaching a segment of their lesson, or you're doing a volunteer class where there's volunteers, students who are coming maybe different from week to week or day to day. So you're always kind of breaking the ice with them, and it raises your affective filter, your stress and so on in that sense.
I remember doing things with other teachers pretending to be students, and that was just horrible.
Yeah. Okay.
All of those are so contrived, right? They're not
Yeah.
real.
Generally they are. They can be useful for practicing particular techniques and so on, but we can never mimic exactly the reactions of our learners very easily.
Right. I go back to the better than nothing.
Yes. Yeah.
Any kind of practice before you walk into the real world is better than nothing, but not much better than nothing, in my opinion, compared to what you're doing is that you can actually talk about some of those real students and the real reactions
Yes.
that would be the most useful thing in the world for Barbie in this case.
Yeah, and you do it over a number of times. You can choose which students you work with and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah.
And then underneath, people share their reflections. You can see some tag feedback here,
Yeah.
thinking what worked well, questions and things to improve on, etc. And so people share within each other. Okay.
Wow.
And sometimes, yeah, it just runs away with itself because you get really into it. So we spend more time than we might have intended, but it's all good.
This reminded me when you showed this to me a long time ago, the first time was that it was like in one of our advanced skills courses when Penny was doing it. And, in the first week, there were 1,200 comments in the forum. And Penny asked me, Stephen, is it going to be like this every week? and by no means did she have to look at them all, but she just could not believe. But she was able to ask a few good questions. And then, you know, there are 35 people in that particular course who all jumped on, you know, a number of them jumped on, people get into it. So the more you as the tutor can create that sense of trust in the community, and the more people start giving as well as receiving, there's no better way of doing teacher development in my mind than when the students, in this case the teachers, take over. And, you know,
so this is one of the things that, you know, I see in different groups, teachers groups, people asking about what course should I take and so on. And there's, you know, there's a very strong vocal camp of people who say, you know, doing a course online, you know, don't do a course online. It's not worth anything, etc. It doesn't have a teaching component, which we do. Or, you know, you can't work with real students, which we do. The other thing is that what people forget is the advantages that you get from being online. Like you're just saying, you can't have those 1,200 comments and multiple interactions with all the members of your class face to face, right? Because you'd be interrupting, talking over each other and so on, but you can do it asynchronously.
But listen, that's the big one right there. The second big one is the idea that I can barely sit down with all the other teachers in my department and have real honest conversations about the students and the teachers and what we're doing in class. It just rarely ever happens. But yet I'm able online to talk with a like-minded teacher in another university, or this used to happen when I was a high school teacher, is that we could share things without any of the politics or fears or, you know, is that going to come back at me? Is the principal going to be asking me about this because he heard it from another teacher? And, you know, so there's such an openness that happens if the leadership is good at the beginning. There's such a trigger or an openness that happens that people just let it all out.
Yeah, and so this is the really important thing of creating that safe community.
Yeah,
and
which in that advanced skills course, it's all behind a password. It's not a public space; it's a private space. As are, aside from you showing us screenshots tonight, all of that are secrets between you and Rhett and Barbie.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happens in the room stays in the room.
That's right. What happens in iTDi Vegas stays in iTDi Vegas.
Okay. So we've kind of walked through a little bit from the input and the output, the intake, and up to where it's starting to happen.
Yeah.
And then we record those teaching videos, and we have a chance to then in tutorials to talk about them.
Yeah.
And also go back and reflect. So you've got reflection in written form, and then also follow-up discussions and so on.
Yeah.
And also leading towards kind of towards the end, we look at, you know, the difference between what we plan for our lesson in our lesson planning and what we actually do in practice, and appreciating and understanding the gaps, the difference.
What actually happened.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, my favorite line is Dick Allwright.
Yes.
Who you remember that one? He said, you know, a lesson is a co-production
Hmm.
between the teacher and the students.
Hmm.
The only problem is the students don't know the script. You know.
Nice reminder. And yeah, it goes hand in hand with the other one, talking about, you know, the importance of basically the lesson being a series of decisions.
Yes.
And learning how to make good decisions is a big part of what it
Those
means.
three levels, eh? The decisions before, the planning decisions
Mhm.
before the lesson starts, the decisions in the lesson called interactive
Mhm.
decisions, and then the reflective decisions
Mhm.
after the lesson, and how you really need to focus in on those interactive ones.
Uh,
Those are the most important for sure.
and then so by, you know, the other nice thing is, you know, by what I didn't fully appreciate until we'd gone through the whole 20 weeks is
Yeah,
how, you know, we know that it takes time, right? You can
yeah,
do something in a 4-week intensive course, but there's only so much you can learn and remember.
right.
Over 20 weeks, you know, we still do the same amount. It's a lot,
Yeah.
but we have just that bit of extra time, and also there's more opportunities to loop things back into our teaching practice
Mm,
and into subsequent videos, get feedback. If there's something we want to continue working on, we can.
mm.
For example, if I still want to keep working on the quality of my instructions over a number of weeks, then I can. And I can see that improvement and the change that happens as well.
Yeah, it all takes time, and that's why I've so many of these one day teacher training things are the norm. One day teacher training workshops or lectures,
Mhm.
and they're really, again, without being too obnoxious, they're better than nothing.
Right. And I mean, it's actually, yeah, I think that's the bottom, the lowest bar.
Yeah,
Um, but at the same time, you know, for me, often there's a really good quality of input there. If you get good workshops, good
yeah,
presentations,
absolutely, absolutely.
and if they're workshops, you get some good opportunity for some output and some practice.
Yeah,
But
but
once,
to me, having that over 20 weeks
Mhm.
is just exponentially, the possibilities are exponentially different.
Right. And for me, the other key point is that, you know, I know I've been to a lot of 1-day workshops and presentations, which I've really enjoyed and so
Me
on.
too.
But once I go away and I put something into practice in my classroom, then so that's where I really then need to follow up after that to be able to say, hey, look, this didn't work like it was supposed to, or, you know, I'm not sure if I did it quite right or whatever. And to be able to go back and talk about it and continue that development is really key to, you know, our own growth.
Mm.
Um,
Got a good question from Duncan. What is he talking about? It depends which he's referring to. And I would suggest he go back and watch the whole video, because it's we're talking about a lot, actually. And it's all tied in together. We're trying to signpost as much as possible, but I couldn't tell you which part of what you watched are we talking about right now.
yeah, so thank you for your question. If you can expand on it, that'd be helpful, and we'll either answer you in the comments or later on in the video. Either
Yeah,
way.
but watch the whole thing, I think, would be the first step.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
Well,
recording later.
can I ask you what's Barbie doing on this slide you're showing us?
Here she was talking about the differences between her planned lesson and the actual lesson that she took in place.
Yeah.
The lesson that she taught and recorded in
This
her.
is a presentation, isn't it?
Yeah, this is part of the final presentation.
Yeah.
And then she was talking about some of the her teaching approach, and being able to, by the end of the course, teachers able to talk about what kind of approach they take, what kind of methods they use, and what their beliefs are about language learning.
I mean, when I watched this the first time live, I was so impressed with how much confidence Barbie spoke with. And
Right.
this was week what? Week
This was week
18 or something, or
19. Yes.
yeah, 18, 19, yeah. And the same with Rhett, is that they knew what they were talking about based on the experience they had, and everything that was kind of churning around inside their head over an extended period of time.
Yes.
As we saw in their written assignments as well. Have you mentioned that?
Yeah, so during the course, then there are 2 written assignments, and basically we do them in a draft stage, and you can see this is a draft, and I'm not going to share it for very long, but you can see we give feedback on the side. Yep. And then we're really looking at the process of developing ideas and so forth. I'm just going to go off there. There are 2 assignments. One assignment, written assignment, gets people thinking about reflective learning and reflective teaching.
Yeah.
So very much kind of about the process of learning and teacher development. And the second one is focusing on understanding our own teaching approach or teaching philosophy, which we decided was important because also sometimes for job applications as well, teachers need to be able to either submit a written statement of teaching philosophy or teaching approach,
yep.
or they need to be able to talk about it in their interviews and be able to kind of back up what they say in an informed way, but either based on research or sound practice and theory.
But it's such a theoretical idea to begin with that if you can, I mean, that's why we have essay questions on tests. If you can write about what you've learned, it's a pretty good explanation or demonstration that you actually learned something.
Yes, and there's that opportunity, of course, for people to be able to organize their thoughts and
absolutely
create a logical flow. And also, for some people, they just prefer to be able to write things down than to just have to vocalize it and so on. So people have different strengths, and we've tried to make sure that we cater for a wide range of skills and also preferences.
So we're up on time here. I'm wondering if you think I should share that last slide and go another 5 minutes or so talking about the subtext.
Yeah, I'm good for time. And the other thing is just a question of if anybody else wants to jump in with any questions relevant to what we've just been talking about. I'll just go check in the chat.
I'll open up that slide then now, okay?
And whilst you're doing that, I'll get back to you with your questions that are specific about the course. And just to answer your previous question, sorry for missing that earlier, what's the difference between TEFL and TESOL? So TEFL is a generic term for teaching English as a foreign language. And on one side you have TEFL and TESL, teaching English as a second language. Teaching English as a foreign language is where English is not the main language spoken outside of the classroom, like Japan or like France, for example. Teaching English as a second language, English is the language outside the classroom, like the UK, Canada. Malaysia is an interesting one because it's kind of straddles both sides, depending upon where you are. And TESOL comes more out of North America, but is kind of becoming widespread internationally.
As teaching English to speakers of other languages, right?
So this kind of incorporates both TEFL and TESL.
Yeah. I think to me, the biggest difference is sort of the EFL context and the ESL context. And that's a real important distinction to understand. Because the rules are really, really different.
Yeah, it changes in big two. That changes the opportunities for learning and use, and it typically changes the motivations that people have for learning.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. In regards to certificates, which I think she's also asking about, is that so a lot of certificate courses, they advertise themselves as either being TEFL or TESOL. They're essentially marketing the same type of things, but you should always look very closely at course components and also what kind of expectations they have. There's some good blogs out there. I will share a link later. What Kate and Chris did, share some very informative things to help you make good decisions about what kind of TEFL or TESOL certificate you should take. And you can also look at TESOL.org, the big organization in the US, or TEFL in the UK for more advice as well.
See, Amina has a question about what if I missed a class? Well, we have most things, we don't have classes per se. We have these tutorials once a week, but they are recorded. And that's something that if you go through the registration page and seriously consider taking this, that we could certainly make time in email or whatever is necessary to answer all those questions. We have quite a detailed explanation of what you need in terms of time and energy in order to be, we want you to be successful with this course.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Before we wrap up, yeah, I'm not sure I have enough time on this anymore. Yeah. And basically, the bottom line is that you can find discussions about input, intake, output, and uptake all over the internet. There are many people for numbers of years. We looked at one by a researcher named Kolb, and it's from 1984. So people have certainly been looking at all of this for a long time, but we really feel like there's something new in this online delivery of a TESOL certificate course with iTDi. And that's what I call the subtext. Are you seeing that on the screen now?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Now, what's interesting, there we go. So if we just look quickly at the input, that we're basically giving you some of the best materials that are out there right now. We mentioned Scott Thornbury, Adrian Doff, and a number of us who are very committed to doing the best we can for teachers. But actually the subtext of all of this is based on this kind of trust. We have a reputation over the last 6 years of people constantly saying they had a really excellent experience working with the admin side, the instructors, the fellow teachers, that our credibility is pretty darn high right now. And that's the subtext of the input. The next one we talked about was the intake, being all of these online lessons plus interactive forum readings. But again, the subtext of all of this is based on the concept of empathy, because we are teachers. We're not a big publishing company or a big conglomerate that's trying to build something that's ready for everybody everywhere, like an international textbook, for example. We're building this as teachers, training other teachers. So we really believe we have a lot of empathy on our side. On this output, the idea of giving this tag feedback, tell what you think, ask questions, give suggestions based on your real lessons, your real students, and that we think that that's a core difference between what we're doing and others are doing. But it's also based on this underlining sense of connection, which is the fact that the tutors on this program have excellent communication skills, great experience in the field, and a high level of human relations skills, and think about motivation and inspiration and teamwork and group dynamics, all of these EQ, emotional quotient, emotional intelligence kinds of ideas. And finally, trying to get on to the last one here is, we say that there's such an opportunity for uptake in taking this course that we call it this transformational growth. And the word transformational actually came from some of the people taking the course when we asked them to describe how it was, and they said for them it was a transformational experience. And we say, yeah, for anybody who's ready for that kind of transformation, we have it. And showing that the underlying subtext of all of this is our belief in the teachers who are taking this, in saying that we offer support before you enter this course by giving you as much information before you make a commitment as possible, and then during the course, which is natural, but then after the course as well, means that we're still in touch with people that took courses with us 6 years ago. And it's part of my own personal philosophy as a teacher, is that once you've been a student in my class, you're welcome to contact me anytime, forever. And a few months ago, I had a contact from a student I had 30 years ago. She's now got her own company and was looking for a teacher to do something in a production company with her in Kyoto. And so that idea that we're committed to people's ongoing professional development. So I believe that, to wrap this up, is that there's some idea between, on the surface, everything we've designed and offer to our teachers, but that there's a very special subtext that is kind of the values, or the there's that word that I can't pull out right now, the raison d'etre, or the philosophy of the way, not what we do, but also how we do it.
Yeah, so one of the things as well is that we've strongly believed in this, is that we shouldn't be providing a course that says, here's a course, you finish the course, now you're ready, goodbye, go off and go and do your thing. It's very much been about, here's a course as well. We know that most of the learning takes place and continues after we do a course and so on, and we go into classrooms and we're still putting things into practice. And that's one of the other reasons why we had the teachers' room, so people can come back and have those conversations that typically you can't have after you've seen a presentation and walked away. And
we're committed to that idea that a big
yes.
part of the learning is potentially after you've finished the course. Because as Barbie said, she feels like she has so many tools, so many more new tools on how to teach, how to reflect, how to make changes. And so the growth that she's going to go through from this point onward, we're dying to invite her back for things like the teacher's room, where teachers are talking, once a week about what happened in their classes that week, or they're talking about a topic that we've preset for the teacher's room. Huge potential for growth after completing a course, hey?
Absolutely.
So,
okay.
Yep, there we go.
Just skimming in the chat. I think there's no more questions at the moment. If you do have any, feel free to add them. We will get back to them later as well. And we'll also be sharing this video of our Facebook page, of course, and we will also add some useful links for you. So I'm Phil Brown. Thank you very much for listening.
And I'm Stephen Herder, and thank you very much for sharing your hour and a half with us. Again, go back and watch the whole thing if you came in halfway. We tried to present these thoughts in a way that is somewhat digestible.
Okay, so have a good day, good night, and take care.
Bye-bye.